Few moments in the funding process are as confusing as the one where the answer is neither a clean no nor the yes you were hoping for. You applied for support on a project and the decision comes back approved, but for less than you asked or for only part of what you proposed. It is a strange in-between place, not a rejection you can grieve and move on from, and not a win you can simply celebrate, but something that asks a decision of you in return. Most businesses handle this moment poorly, either treating the reduced offer as an insult and walking away, or grabbing it without thinking and then discovering the smaller version does not quite work. There is a calmer and more capable way to meet a partial yes, and that is what we are going to walk through. One note before we begin, this channel is educational only. We are not a government agency, we are not affiliated with or endorsed by Go Business Enterprise Singapore or any government body, and nothing here is official advice. We name no schemes, no criteria, and no figures because those change over time. So we will always point you back to the official source, gobusiness.gov.sg, to confirm what actually applies to your situation before you rely on any of it. When yes comes with a but, a partial approval is a yes that arrives wearing the clothes of a disappointment, and the first thing to do is recognize it for what it is rather than for what it feels like. Emotionally, getting less than you asked for reads as a setback, a judgment that your project was worth only so much and no more. But that reading is rarely accurate and almost never useful. A reduced offer is still an offer, still a door that opened rather than closed, and the businesses that do well by it are the ones that meet it with a clear head instead of a bruised ego. The temptation is to react at once, to fire off a protest, or to sulk and let the offer quietly lapse, and both are mistakes made in the heat of the moment. What the situation actually calls for is a pause, and then a deliberate decision about whether and how to proceed with the smaller thing on offer. That decision is yours to make well, and the rest of this video is about making it well. Read the decision before you react. Before you feel anything about a reduced offer, read exactly what it says, because a great deal of distress comes from reacting to a version of the decision that exists only in your head. A partial approval usually carries information about what was accepted, what was not, and often some sense of why, and that detail changes everything about how you should respond. Sometimes what looks like a cut is really a reshaping, a redirection toward the parts of your project that were considered strongest. Sometimes a condition you skimmed past turns out to explain the whole thing. Read it slowly, more than once, and separate what the decision actually states from the story you are tempted to tell about it. Only once you genuinely understand the shape of what has been offered can you make a sensible choice about it. And that understanding almost always calms the initial sting because the real decision is usually more workable than the imagined insult. Understand what was trimmed and why. The single most useful thing you can do with a reduced offer is to work out precisely what was left out and, as far as you can tell, for what reason. A project that comes back smaller has usually been narrowed along some logic, and finding that logic tells you a great deal. Perhaps the parts that survived are the ones with the clearest link to the outcome, and the parts that fell away were the softer extras that were harder to justify. Perhaps a whole strand was set aside because it sat outside what the support was meant to cover. Whatever the pattern, seeing it turns a vague sense of loss into concrete information you can act on. It tells you how your project was read, which is worth knowing for this attempt and for every future one, and it lets you decide from understanding rather than from guesswork about what a smaller version of your project would actually be. Decide if the smaller project still works. Here is the real question a partial approval puts to you, and it deserves a genuine answer rather than a reflex. Does the project still make sense at the reduced size, or does trimming it break something essential? Some projects scale down gracefully, losing a little reach or polish but keeping their core intact and their benefit real. Others have a minimum below which they simply do not function, where removing a part removes the point. You have to be honest about which kind yours is, because proceeding with a broken smaller version helps nobody, and abandoning a perfectly workable smaller version out of pride is just as wasteful. Sit with the reduced shape and ask whether it still delivers something worth doing on its own terms. If it does, that is your answer. If it genuinely does not, that is also an answer, and the clean one better reached now than halfway through. Rescope rather than force the original. If the smaller offer can work, the move is to rescope the project around it deliberately, not to squeeze the original plan into a space that no longer fits. Forcing your first design into a reduced envelope tends to produce something half done. All the ambition of the full plan crammed into too little room, stretched thin and likely to disappoint. Rescoping is the opposite discipline. It starts from what is actually available and asks what genuinely good, complete, smaller project can be built inside it. One that finishes cleanly rather than one that gestures at the larger thing you wanted. This is a design task and it rewards a little care. A well-rescoped project has its own integrity, a beginning and an end that match its means, and it very often turns out to be sharper and more focused than the sprawling version you first proposed, because constraint has a way of clarifying what actually matters. Protect the core, trim the edges. When you rescope, be intentional about what you keep and what you let go, because the instinct under pressure is to shave a little off everything, and that is the worst way to cut. Trimming uniformly weakens the whole project evenly and leaves you with a faint version of the original that does nothing especially well. The stronger approach is to protect the core, the part that carries the real value, and to trim decisively from the edges the additions that were nice rather than necessary. Decide what the project absolutely must do to be worth doing. Defend that fiercely and be ruthless about everything around it. A smaller project that does its one essential thing fully will always beat a same-sized project that does 5 things faintly. So cut with a scalpel and a clear sense of priority, not with a blunt instrument applied evenly across the board, and let the core come through intact. Do not quietly overspend to cover the gap. There is a quiet trap in a reduced offer, and it catches careful owners as easily as careless ones. When support comes back smaller than hoped, the temptation is to keep the full project anyway and simply cover the gap yourself, dipping further into the business than you planned in order to hold on to the original ambition. Sometimes that is a sound choice made with open eyes. Very often it is a drift into overcommitment made emotionally rather than financially, because letting go of the full plan feels like losing. Be honest with yourself about which it is. If the larger project is worth funding yourself, fund it as a clear decision, not as a reflex to avoid disappointment. If it is not, let the project be the size the support allows, and do not let wounded ambition pull your business into spending it should not carry for a plan that was only ever partly backed. Ask the people who decided. If the decision leaves you genuinely unclear about what was approved or why it was reduced, the sensible move is to ask calmly and specifically rather than to guess or to steal. A well-framed question to whoever handled the decision can turn a confusing outcome into a clear one, telling you what a smaller version needs to look like, whether the trimmed parts might be reconsidered another time, or simply what the reasoning was. The tone matters enormously here. You are asking to understand, not arguing that you were wronged, and the difference shows in how the exchange goes. Approach it as a business owner seeking clarity so you can make a good decision, and you will usually get useful information back. Approach it as a complaint, and you close the very door you were hoping to learn through. Ask well, listen properly, and use what you hear to decide, not to dispute. Keep the door open for a later attempt. A partial approval this time is not a permanent ceiling, and part of handling it well is thinking beyond the immediate project to what comes after. The parts that were trimmed away have not vanished, they have simply not been supported now, and depending on how things stand, they may be worth returning to later, once the smaller project is done and has shown what it can do. Completing the reduced version well is itself an argument for the rest, evidence that your business follows through and puts support to good use. So treat this outcome as one step rather than a verdict. Finish what was approved, do it properly, and keep a note of what was left for a future conversation when conditions may have changed. Owners who take the partial yes gracefully and deliver on it are in a far stronger position next time than those who walked away insulted. Mind the terms attached to what was approved. A reduced offer still comes with conditions, and it is easy to pay so much attention to the size of the cut that you overlook the terms attached to what remains. Whatever was approved carries expectations about how it is used, what has to be true along the way, and what you will need to show, and those expectations apply just as firmly to a smaller project as to a large one. Read them as carefully as you read the amount, because a project that ignores its conditions can run into trouble regardless of how modest it is. Understand what you are agreeing to before you accept. Note anything you must track from the start, and build those requirements into how you run the work rather than discovering them at the end. The smaller scale does not lighten the obligations, so give the terms the same serious attention you would give a full award. Confirm the current details at the source. Everything about how a partial decision works, what your options are, and what the terms mean sits inside a system that shifts over time. So treat any general understanding, including this one, as a starting point rather than the final word. The way reduced offers are handled, whether and how they can be discussed, and what accepting one commits you to are all matters of current detail. And current detail is exactly what we deliberately avoid naming here, because it changes. When you are holding a real decision in your hands, the place to confirm what it actually means is the official source, gobusiness.gov.sg, alongside whatever direct channel handled your applications. Use this video for the posture, the calm and deliberate way of thinking about a partial yes, and use the official source for the specifics that apply to your particular situation right now. The mindset travels well across time. The details do not, so check them where they are kept. A closing thought. So here is the shape to carry away. A partial approval is a yes in disappointing clothing, and the way to handle it is to pause rather than react. Read the decision closely and understand exactly what was trimmed and why. Ask honestly whether the smaller project still works, and if it does, rescope around what is offered, rather than forcing your original plan into too little room, protecting the core and trimming the edges. Do not quietly overspend to cover the gap out of wounded ambition. Ask the people who decided when you need clarity, and keep the door open for a later attempt by delivering well now. Mind the terms attached to what was approved, and confirm the specifics at the source when a real decision is in front of you. Remember too that everything here is general and educational. We are not a government agency, and we are not affiliated with or endorsed by anyone, and we name no schemes because they change. If this helped you see a reduced offer as a decision rather than a defeat, subscribe for more plain English Singapore grant explainers, and we will keep helping you handle whatever the process sends back, one clear-headed choice at a time.